Hey, good morning. I'm Paige Browning. Happy MLK Day. This is Seattle Now. Martin Luther King Jr. advocated for radical change worldwide. Alongside his civil rights work, he was pro-labor and opposed both capitalism and militarism. That revolutionary spirit and grand vision are still being built by people like Seattle author Ijeoma Oluo. She's the author of Be a Revolution: How Everyday People Are Fighting Oppression and Changing the World, and How You Can Too. It's a 2024 best-selling book showing people around the country making change toward racial equity in American systems. And readers are challenged to act themselves. Last June, KUOW's Katie Campbell talked with Ijeoma live at the Seattle Public Library for KUOW's book club. Today, we're sharing that conversation.
Let's just jump into it, shall we? Beautiful. There was a line in your author's note that I think perfectly captured why I wanted to read this book this month. Quote, "We have the right to define ourselves, and the removal of that right is one of the strongest tools of oppression." And we're seeing that a lot right now. And you represent a number of communities. You talk about that in your book. So I just want to start by asking, how are you right now?
I always say, good with an asterisk, right? I am constantly trying to remember that I come from a long line of peoples who have lived through this and worse. And not only lived, but loved, celebrated, built, cared. And I honor that by continuing to fight and continuing to live and care for how I live. Yeah. So that to me is fundamental to the struggle I'm in right now. Mm-hmm. It's the moments where I have to remember, okay, you're not just grief, you're not just fear, you're not just anger. You're a mom, you're a partner, you're a writer, you're a community member, you're a friend. And so that's what I'm focusing on right now. I travel between overwhelm, terror, exhaustion, heartbreak, love, excitement, hope, back and forth. And that's part of life. I wish it wasn't as much of a roller coaster as it is right now, but that's where we are. So the thing I'm telling myself that I'm trying to reconcile, because I think so many of us, this is a long answer to your question. I think so many people here will recognize when I say I have spent, especially since, I want to say 2016, saying, let's just get through this. Let's just get through this. Let's just get through this. And even as I've been writing and saying, this isn't a phase. This isn't temporary. This is end stage capitalism. This is the, effects of long-term exploitation and subjugation. This is environmental degradation. I still would wake up and say, get through this year, get through this month, get through this next 6 months, get through the next 4 years. And I, this year, had to sit with myself and say, if this is forever, how do I live? Who do I build with? What do I do? What does that mean? And that's the struggle I'm in right now. And it doesn't mean I'm not hopeful. But I think we all know what we can see in our lifetime and what we won't. And so trying to recognize what it means to struggle in this reality and to live in this reality is the thing that I'm grappling with right now.
What you're saying, too, reminds me of another conversation I had with author Putsata Rang, who wrote Ma and Me, about her family's escape from Cambodia. And she talked about pleasure as an act of revolution in and of itself. Like finding joy in a moment can be a revolutionary act because it's the people who are doing the oppressing want us to be down and sad. It's when we're mad and able to get organized that we can actually do something. I'm from Florida originally, so you may not be surprised to hear that my public education didn't include a lot of labor and organizing history. I'm a union steward at KUOW. We're currently going through a really difficult budget time, and so I've been doing a lot of union stewarding. I'm learning now how to the best of my ability, represent all sorts of people and their voices. So I appreciated how you explored that, and also business through the lens of fighting oppression, keeping with that theme. I know some people, especially younger folks, struggle with capitalism and how money and materialism can be part of how we express ourselves and create ourselves. So I wonder how you approach that in your work as a writer, as an activist, because these movements still need money, right, to thrive. Like, how do we operate in that?
I think that is a struggle. It was so interesting because I remember I was looking at a post that was talking about economic protest. And one thing they said was, well, you could commit to living under a taxable amount. And I was like, where? How? Who? And for me, fundamentally, the level of privilege in that, right? Because there are, first of all, so many people who will never have a choice. But really the people who say, I'm committed to, like we've met those people. And they usually have other people who make more than the taxable amount, who can ensure that they can eat and have a roof over their heads. I believe in economic protest and boycott. I believe in taxation protest and boycott. But I think acting like we don't live in the world we live in, and that a lot of these choices are more difficult for some people than others, is really important. I also think that we have been told that there are only particular ways to get by in a capitalist system. So I always like to say it is as important to understand the direction you're moving in as where you are. And so in this kind of world of, and I hate saying purity culture because I feel like it's a thing that people will throw at you when you're giving valid critique, and they're like, purity culture? And like, no, that's not what this is. But there is a level of purity culture, especially around capitalism, that's like, you engage with money and you call yourself an anti-capitalist. And it's like, cool, I don't want to starve to death. And you have to find
due.
Like there are realities of the world, and I want to build towards a world where we don't need those things, but it doesn't mean I can act like I don't live in the world I live in now. And so I think what's really important is to have a clear idea, a clear imagining of what you can build. And ask yourself as you're moving, am I moving towards that in my steps? And especially when it comes to capitalism, because that can be so hard. We can get so caught up in the day-to-day, and then we can feel guilty, like, I bought this thing I shouldn't have bought, or I work for this company, and they are not the 100% virtuous company. And what instead you can say is, this is my idea of the world I want, where I don't have to make these decisions, where our labor is appreciated, where we aren't judged by our labor, where people who can't produce in this capitalistic sense are still valued and loved and cared for. These are the things I'm doing that help move me and the world that direction. And recognize the things that you're doing that don't, and then say, okay, so how can I mitigate that one day? Or who could help me mitigate that one day? Or how can I keep that on my radar so that I remember what my ultimate goal is? So as a writer, I write about these things. I critique these things. I make 7 to 15% of every book sold. And a majority white, multi-billion-dollar company gets the rest of that. And I have no say of how much the people printing those books are paid, how much the people delivering them are paid, how much the people at the bookstores are paid. I have no say about how much of that money goes to fund the conservative imprint that my publisher might have. And that's the world I'm in right now. And for me to get that out, I would love to be able to create a space that is different than that. And that's a thing, even when I think of my career, I think long term. I'm constantly, like with each book, with each project, I'm asking, how does this move me closer to that vision? And I adjust and I change. And so I sit with that and I can recognize and I can say openly here now the reality of the capitalist system I am a part of. And I can also say that I envision and work towards a space where I know how much everyone who is working in the production of my books gets paid. And I know what communities benefit most. And I know where the money and the profit made off of my work goes. And I know what I get, and I know how my work is valued and seen in the world. I work towards that in every step I make. And that is all I can ask of myself right now, lest I just stop writing.
And don't do that. Please don't stop writing. I'm glad you mentioned that kind of caricature of the anti-capitalist who's like, can't believe you use money. I think we all know some folks in Seattle. Maybe they mean well, but you don't want to let them off the hook that easily, but they're just not thinking it all the way through. And I want to talk about these people who would maybe identify themselves as quote unquote allies in a variety of movements. So in the chapter, What is Disability in Communities of Color? You talk about not realizing that things like anxiety disorder and ADHD counted, quote unquote, as disabilities. And it made me think of all the ways that certain groups of people have been made to feel not enough of X to be included in a movement, not disabled enough, not Black enough, not queer enough. Like colorism exists and transphobia exists in cisgender queer spaces. So how do we push back on oppressive systems among those people who would still identify themselves as allies?
I would say it's super important to recognize, I think, multiple truths at once. One, when the most marginalized person in any group is heard, you will be heard, but only if you can identify with that person. And so that work goes both ways. It goes with uplifting those voices, but also recognizing that you are a part of that spectrum as well. And that means embracing it, being open about it, and also supporting it. And so for me, when I write about not thinking that my neurodivergence, and now we can add autism diagnosis into that as well, and my anxiety disorder and things counted as disability, a lot of it for me was thinking, I don't want to take up space. I don't want to take up space not owed to me, but recognizing that I can be cognizant of space I take up. But if I don't also say I'm a part of this, it means any gains I get don't count towards anyone else. No one else can benefit. If I walk into an office and say, you know what, I have anxiety, can I have this accommodation? And I don't say this is about disability, then the next person that says, I'm disabled, can I have this accommodation? They could say, no, we don't do that here. And what I got doesn't count. And even in queerness, right, there are a lot of people who think, people reach out to me because I talk about being queer, and I would say it's maybe one of the lesser, forefront of my identities, because it's just my sex life and love life. I keep private in a way, while also knowing that you all know more about my partner by following me than you ever would following them.
It's right there, by the way.
I get hyper-focused on certain things, and then it's a very casual thing. Oh, yeah, also queer. And so people will say, I love the way you can just say it because I think I can't because I'm not in this particular group, or maybe because I'm bi, or because I'm queer and in a heterosexual presenting relationship, or because I'm non-binary, but you wouldn't know by looking at me. And while we can always recognize that if you are walking down the street very visibly trans, you are at more risk for what's happening now, you're at even more risk of those who aren't as visibly trans, aren't recognized and don't recognize themselves as such. And so that becomes a whole relationship and a dynamic. And that's to say, you don't have to do anything. You don't owe anyone a definition. You don't owe anyone an outing, if you will. And there are plenty of reasons for safety, and we talk about this in the disability chapter, of why, many Black people will not identify as disabled even as they struggle with disability. Because the cost is real, and there are plenty of queer Black people I know who will never publicly identify as queer, at least anytime soon, because the cost is real. But if you know that you don't have to pay quite that cost, or you feel like you can, you speaking out about it helps. But only if you are aware of your privilege that allows you to do so. So I think of it like that. And I think it's, a lot of people get annoyed when we talk about privilege and being aware of privilege, but it is so important and it is so empowering to know where you are in privilege-wise in relationship to other people. If I don't know what my privilege is, I don't know where my power is. And if you think that acceptance into a group means never having to wrestle with your privilege, it also means never being able to activate the power you have in a particular space. If you come in and you're like, I'm right with you, and you are the most privileged person in that room, it means you're probably just sitting next to them, feeling like you have the exact same barriers in front of you. And you could be taking this into other spaces. You could be advocating in these particular ways, but you won't because you think it might separate you out. And so when I see bitterness where people are don't want people who are more privileged in a space, it's not because they don't want more privileged people in space. It's because they don't want that unchecked privilege in the space. And I think as difficult as it can be, recognizing that and recognizing that it's flexible and it moves, that privilege is always relationship, is very, very empowering.
As you're also thinking about privilege and about our own identities and about the ways that we can connect with this book, I'm going to read a somewhat long passage from page 218, so bear with me. Environmental issues are racial justice issues. BIPOC communities are often the first affected and almost always the worst affected by environmental injustice. And that's by design. If we all shared an equal burden for our ravages to the environment, people might be compelled to do something about them. Further, environmental injustice is often perpetrated by the same powers behind racial and economic injustice, and these injustices often serve to compound and defend one another. And yet, this is not typically how our environmental crisis has been discussed in society. It's a story dominated by white voices, focusing on the harm that will eventually come to white communities, not the harm that has already been wreaking havoc on communities of color for centuries. On pages 227 and 228, you add, if you think environmentalism is your issue and somehow racism isn't, you need to ask yourself if the future you're trying to save has people of color in it at all. So what you're describing here, it feels like kind of like single issue activists, if you will, like kind of like single issue voters. Is that fair, you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because you can be truly single issue, but if you are and you're looking at the fullness of the issue, you will be surprised at the amount of things you'll find yourself, being an activist toward, because nothing is only one issue, especially when we're talking about systemic oppression. So when people tell me, like, I was mystified. Anyone who follows my work knows I've been very outspoken about the genocide in Gaza. And the amount of people who go, I don't know why you're focusing on this. If we don't focus on the environment, we're all going to be dead anyways. And I'm like, if you care about the environment, what do you think bombs are doing? Like, what do you think is literally happening to the environment in Palestine? You care about it? Do you? Or do you just care about what might happen to you? I've met so many people who've been truly, deeply radicalized, and I say that in the most amazing, beautiful term. And I will not geek out again about what radicalization means. But people who've been truly radicalized, realizing that we need a deep systemic shift, often do so through a single issue. It becomes their whole focus, and they become obsessed about it, and they want to know why, and they want to know what it touches. And then they're like, oh my goodness, it touches everything. And what? You mean I can't talk about, I have to address racism if I want to address the environment? What do you mean? And like, that is something that many of us have to know if we live at those intersections. And so when people say, oh, you're a single issue person, whatever, the only true single issue is white supremacy or capitalism. Like, white supremacists are single issue. Capitalists are single issue. And they will destroy the entire world for those goals. And the rest of us are looking at these issues that are just different tentacles of the same beast and trying to apply our skills where they best fit, where our concerns lie, where we feel like we can make the biggest difference. And I am completely fine with someone saying that is only the environment. But if it is, you better actually know what you're doing. Look into that and look into all of it, because you can't say you're an environmentalist, but you only care about what happens in your neighborhood. Then you're not. You're like a weird, block person. I don't know. You might as well just join a homeowners association. But, if you care about any of these things, and, I love music, and it brought me to this because I started seeing what's stopping me from having this fullness of music, or what's stopping musicians from being cared for. And then suddenly you're a labor activist. And so I just don't believe there is a single issue thing outside of people clinging to oppression, to their ability to oppress.
It makes me think of how you've structured the book even. You'll have a section on labor, race, and business, and then you break it down into unions and business and community efforts to shop correctly. It is taking the single issue, allegedly, and breaking it down to the subgenres. But you can't know an issue unless you've broken it down to those subgenres. Your section on art as revolution includes another great quote from author and activist Grace Lee Boggs. Quote, "A people exercising their creativity in the face of devastation is one of the greatest contributions to humankind." Again, I love that quote. You found some really incredible, just like people to talk to and talk about. For the KUOW Book Club, we also read Seattle author Corinne Manning's incredible story collection, We Had No Rules. I really wanted to celebrate Pride with both your nonfiction work on fighting oppression and their work of fiction that does the same thing by identifying in ourselves these things. Something I asked them was why they think it's important to identify these quote unquote rules that aim to govern us, why it's important to name the things that are trying to oppress us to be able to address them. And I'm curious what your answer to that would be as well.
Well, because we're being gaslit. Because we're being told that these things don't exist or have a natural order of things. And not that every single rule outside of that we need to eat, we need to breathe, we need shelter, is manufactured. And you can live your whole life not understanding that you're living by rules that someone no better than you made up one day because it suited them, and thinking that they can't be changed. And look at these debates. Look at these weird debates we're having right now around gender. As if we didn't just make some up, you know? And as if every culture hasn't made something up and they're all different. We're like, no, but this one, this is science. And then scientists are like, I beg to differ.
Not those scientists.
From before birth, these are things that we talk about as immovable, right? And then someday someone tells you this is made up. And everything that we think governs our lives and how we're supposed to act, how we're supposed to treat each other, it is all made up. And so naming the thing that we're told is as natural as the air we breathe, giving it a name, giving it definitions, and then we can then talk about what exists outside of it. If everything was always done this way and we've never named it, then how do we name something else? How do we name something different? And so I think there's a real harm done to people by telling them that what they're experiencing, they're not experiencing. Or the world we have is the only world that's ever been and could ever be. And by naming things, either by naming them anew or returning to names we once knew, is a really powerful way of starting to recognize our own power of creation in this world.
And even just being willing to say white supremacy is why we have these systems. Like these systems built to specifically benefit like white cisgender men in particular, but all white people. To be able to say that is powerful, and to be able to know like that is the devil you know, right? That is the enemy. And how do I push back to be able to know what you're pushing back against?
Absolutely. And yeah, being able to point, go, oh, that too, that too, that too, that, and also that, and that looks just like it. Should we give it the same name? Let's give it the same name. And then that goes over on this category. When you feel like you're talking about this, you're probably talking about all these other things. Like that is really, really important. And this is also why you'll see people pushing back against that. The amount of people who go, well, I don't think you should use the word white supremacy for that. You know, that's not maybe the right word, because they don't want it to fall into that category, because they don't want the response to be the same. They don't want us to be able to simplify that reaction and say, when you encounter a white supremacist, this is what you do. And instead, well, but what if that's not white supremacy? What if it's this instead? And maybe then you don't know how to act. Maybe you have to think about it a little bit more, right? So I think that naming is super, super important.
Can be really uncomfortable to be seen, especially if you don't want to be operating in the light. Something that I noticed throughout the book was that you talked to a lot of people who saw a gap in advocacy work and created the space that was missing. Brittany R. Wilson, for example, in your chapter on disability, she talked about expecting disability law to be a part of her legal schooling, and it just wasn't. Like, there wasn't a class for that. It literally wasn't there. What was it about these folks, do you think, after talking so much with them? What was it that gave them that oomph, that drive, that ability to make their own way forward and build something fresh and new?
I think for the most part, a lot of this is people who live in these communities or are directly impacted by the lack of this. So if you are in a position to be able to create something, or if you're in a space and you know that this won't serve you if it doesn't exist, then some people say, let me try to create it. Let me create it. I think there is so much beauty in the people who have, it never occurred to them they might not be able to. And part of that is if you live outside of systems. And so I think this is hard. This might be hard for some of the more privileged people in this room to understand. If you, from before your birth, were underserved or harmed by the systems that exist, every ounce of your existence is owed to thinking outside of what already exists and creating new ways or leaning into other people who have created new things. So it is not surprising to me that a disabled law student, a Black disabled law student, would say, let me create a thing. Because you don't get to law school as a Black disabled woman without creating a lot of things along the way. And I will also add, that's exhausting. Yeah. And it is almost always under-resourced on multiple levels. It could always be so much more if these institutions that have all these resources actually said, let's support the people who are the real change makers in this space. What would it mean if our Black disabled law students came in here and we asked them what they needed to see? What it would happen if we already had Black disabled lawyers in here? This could all be better. And instead of building it and instead of paying to teach your school how to teach, you could actually get that fullness of education. And so it does not shock me. I think that every person in this book is amazing and wonderful. But I also think we have this idea that there's like these really special people that come in and they're like, oh, it had to be you. But there are people using immense creativity to figure out how they're going to get groceries tonight. The question is just what does that creativity get to go to? Yeah. And so I am so grateful for the people who chose and had to choose these paths. But I wish they didn't have to.
Yeah, someone's creativity might be a single mom who's trying to plan out her schedule to get her kids to an art program, to a library conversation. I don't think my mom's here yet, but she did that a lot for me. Oh, there she is. Hi, Mommy. That was perfect timing, Mom. Wow. Oh, she's going to kill me. But I was just saying that you found the time like to take me to libraries, right? To introduce me to art programs in the spare time, which I still don't understand how she humanly had. Like that's what creativity can look like to some people is like, I don't have time to go make a movement. I got to keep a roof over my family's head. But I do have the time to figure out like what can I introduce to a child's life, to a family member's life, to a friend's life? Yeah. In your chapter on race and education, you include the story of Sarah Kamal, and she quotes an Indigenous scholar named Dr. Anthony Craig, who works at the University of Washington, by the way, and he asked this question, which kind of gets to what we're talking about here. Quote, when liberation comes, are we going to be ready? And that's a really tough question, because as you explore in the book too, like, there is liberation and we can kind of have an idea of what that looks like, but then we also have to be ready for it and ready to let go of the systems that we're comfortable in that hold us back. But I want to know how you would answer Dr. Craig's question. Are we going to be ready when liberation comes?
I think the idea of liberation coming is kind of a fantastical idea because what does that mean? Like, does it mean that one day all of the big business owners disappear and the warmongers go away? Like, what does that mean? Does it mean that we all rise up at once like it's in a movie? I think that liberation has a chance to appear each and every day of our lives. And the more that we seek that and embrace it and feed that, the more we get to something closer to living a globally liberated life. And I don't think that struggle is ever over. But I also think that means there is also victory to be had every single day. So I don't think we get ready any other way, but by desperately grasping and holding tight to every opportunity for liberation that hits us every single day. And so I think about that a lot in my life. I was telling people I have started this year asking myself, do I consent? When I'm like, I have to do this, I have to do this, I have to do this, instead of going, oh no, I have to do all these things, I ask, do I consent? So I'm asking myself, do I consent to the things I signed up for? Do I consent? Because that's a question we don't ask ourselves. And a lot of times it's like, oh, I think I have to do this, and I think I have to do this, and I think I have to do this, and I am worn down, and I'm exhausted, and I'm falling apart, and I don't remember I still have the right to consent. And I can say, you know what, I don't consent to that. I am not doing that, or I do. And I do know I'll be tired, but I am choosing this. When I'm parenting, I'm constantly thinking of what does liberated parenting look like? What does a liberated 17-year-old look like? And it's scary. Ooh. Right?
And he's got other ideas, I'm sure.
Oh, absolutely. And, what does our relationship look like in that? And every day that I am in a challenging situation with my teenager, I'm thinking this is an opportunity right now to get us a little closer, right? And so all of that matters. It's not just the big things. In fact, you can't get the big things otherwise. How are we supposed to think of a world without cops if we act like cops every time someone pisses us off? How are we supposed to say, I don't think people should be punished and locked away from society when they do wrong, but I do think you should be kicked out of every group that you offend someone in? How do we get there? And so living it every day is how we get there in the end. And we know this because the opposite is true. Every major oppression that we're seeing right now coming down on us started in small steps, started with normalizing the little things. What if we made a joke about these people? What if we just made it okay to be deeply uncomfortable all the time around these people? Then maybe we can make a little rule excluding them. Then we can make a law. It doesn't start the other way, where they go, we're going to do the law first and the people follow. We have to be aware of that. It really does start with these everyday things.
Yeah, those systems of oppression are in and of themselves movements of a sort, and they build up to what they are, and to the point of like, we're in a library, right? The First Amendment is like freedom of speech, and yet we are banning books in this country.
And they are much more effective, meticulous, planned out movements than we have.
Something else that I noticed throughout the book was how you and the people you talked to also acknowledged and embraced the unknown, the things that we don't yet know how they'll turn out. And this is from pages 26 and 27 in your chapter on punishment, accountability, and abolition. Quote, "What does it look like on the other side of this battle? Honestly, I don't know. When I say this, it doesn't sit right with other people, but I think it's important for us to be able to hold space for the unknown here. We've lived in deeply oppressive systems for the entire history of this country. It's all we know of our systems and often of our relationships. When we create spaces and moments of safety and freedom, we get glimpses of what liberation might look like. But I suspect we'll be surprised along the way. And if we aren't able to get comfortable with that, we'll run back into the arms of the certainty of the oppression we already know." And it's like you're describing an abusive relationship, right? Or again, the devil that you know. So how do you help people become comfortable with the unknown, especially if they're new to challenging the status quo?
I think, what's funny is actually that part, I got specific pushback from my editor saying, people are not going to like this.
That's the point.
And I was like, well, they bet they have to learn to, because I'm not walking it back. Like, I'm gonna explain a little more why, but he was like, can't you give a stronger, clearer vision of this? No, I'm not gonna just make stuff up. This is a thing I need people to get comfortable with, because it's such a huge barrier. When you are afraid of the unknown, you will take any certainty, even if that certainty is absolute terror, which is why people can come in and go, a world without cops? What if someone's always breaking into your house and attacking you at night, right? Someone will come in and fill that unknown for you if you aren't comfortable with saying, I don't know what it'll look like. So what you need, I think, is faith in yourself and in your community. And this is where I think why capitalism works so hard to divide us and keep us individualists. I was in conversation with Alexis Pauline Gumbs like a couple months ago now, and she said something like, individualism is so unnatural that it has to be violently enforced by the state. And it does that so that we can't get an idea of what we could do together. And so I actually want to take people back to 2020 and think about what it meant to know for certain that every system we had failed us. Our supply chain broke down. Our medical system wasn't helping. Our government service wasn't helping us. People were out of work with absolutely no benefits, right? There was nothing in place to help. And then think about the global uprising we had for Black lives. There's a reason why that happened that year. It happened that year, one, because we couldn't be distracted. There was no sports game. There was no anything else happening to make it so we could turn away from what's happening to our fellow human beings. But two, we were having to rely on each other, even at a time when we were told we couldn't be near anyone. We were having to. I remember a random person dropping yeast off at my front door because I needed to make bread lest I lose my mind. And there was no yeast to be found. And someone said, I know this is weird, but I kind of know where you live. Can I drop it off at your door? But what we learned, stuck at home with our families, is one, some of us liked our families. Two, we figured out we could keep each other together and going. We learned that we could find moments of joy and happiness while all of these other trappings were taken away. Like, we couldn't find toilet paper, but we were finding every possible way we could to try to care for each other. And what does that turn into? What does it turn into when there is no big promotion you have to work for because you're stuck at home? When there is no new fancy thing to buy because nobody could get anything? It turns into realizing that how we live together matters. It turns into realizing that none of this matters if you can't walk down the street without fearing for your life. And we saw a global uprising. And we saw a global labor uprising as well. All of this happened at the same time, right? The largest uprising in labor we've seen in decades, right? After labor had been successfully dismantled all over the country. We saw this all happening the same years because capitalism had kind of fallen apart for a bit. We got a taste of what's to come, right? Because we are in end-stage capitalism. And that's why, as soon as they could come up with any sort of excuse, they said, we will never do that again. You will never work from home. You will never have free time. You will never have family time. You will never be sitting in your community. And now we've seen this hyper-individualism again, this focus again, and this fear-mongering around what your community can be. All of that to stop a moment when we said collectively, hey, what if we didn't have these cops? What if not getting sick and dying at your job was important? And so I see that because when people say, I am struggling to imagine what comes next, that's by design. You are being kept too busy. You are being robbed of any examples. There are people all over the world building beautiful things outside of these systems, and you are being told they don't exist. And you are being kept far too busy to find it yourself. And so what some of us need to do is help build those pathways and make it easier for us to imagine together. And so when I say, we don't know, part of what we don't know is because it's likely going to be something so amazing and beautiful outside of what we've seen. It's going to shock us with its beauty. But getting there means having faith, remembering that we were in a global pandemic and yet millions of us took to the street together. Remembering every little act of kindness that kept us going. Remembering that we are here because our neighbors wanted us to be here, because our ancestors wanted us to be here. All of that is beautiful creativity where someone looked at hopelessness and said, no, I can do something else. And so I don't know what the future brings, and I am so glad, because everything I know is built off of what I've been conditioned to believe. I am so glad liberation exists outside of that, and we should be too. It's not always scary. It's not only bad that it lives outside of our imagination. In fact, what we know is pretty bad. What we have is pretty bad. It makes sense that the good to come exists outside of that.
That was a KUOW Book Club live event with KUOW's Katie Campbell and Seattle author Ijeoma Oluo. It was in partnership with the Seattle Public Library. You can find more information about KUOW's book club on our website, and you can hear more book conversations on KUOW's Arts and Culture podcast, Meet Me Here. Find it where you get your podcasts. The Seattle Now team is Andy Hurst, Brooklyn Jamerson Flowers, Caroline Chamberlain Gomez, Patricia Murphy, and Vaughn Jones. Greg Kramer does our theme music. Seattle Now and KUOW Public Radio are members of the NPR network. I'm Paige Browning. We're taking the afternoon off of news coverage, so we'll see you back with a new episode tomorrow morning. And today, I hope you take care.